how do you try to avoid overreacting? Because honestly, what I'm trying to do is trying to bet on those overreactions in the market.
You're probably better off not betting it right at that time unless you're getting the best of the number, because afterward, we're going to overcorrect. We're going to protect our book. We're going to protect our risk. Then we might nudge it out a little bit later that night or the next day when we're kind of looking at it with a cooler head and not in the heat of the moment. So, you really just got to be fast and get those in.
This is VSiN's College Football Betting Podcast.
Welcome in another edition of the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Murray. Loaded show today. 2 guests, both lengthy discussions, so that means the open will be very short. But Matt Grill from DraftKings Sportsbook, how the sausage is made. We'll hear his power ratings, what line moves we've seen in Game of the Year, Week 0, Week 1. Take a look at the futures market, Heisman Trophy market. We're going to dive into that with Matt Grill. We did that last year. I thought it was a good conversation, and we'll have him on coming up first. And then after Matt, we will welcome on friend of the pod, Colby Dant. Colby Dant over at SGP, Sports Gambling Podcast, their mega nation, if you will, led by our good friends Ryan Kramer and Sean Green. But Colby, he's already done the work. He's got a plethora of win total bets that he's got in his hopper already, including one that I have already made, and we discussed it on the podcast, which was Air Force over 6.5 wins. Got to lay a little juice there at -160. The other best bet that we've discussed on the podcast, still available right now price-wise, is Texas Tech to win the Big 12 at even money, but a bunch of win totals we're going to discuss with Colby. I think 9 or 10 we get into the G5 ranks as well, but fun conversation as always with Colby Dant. So we're going to, like I said, keep this brief. One thing worth noting, we assumed it, but it wasn't official, but now we do know. Week 0, which is, by the way, 65 days from today as we record this Thursday, June 25th, or 9 weeks from this Saturday, arguably the best game on paper will still be played. There was concerns or questions that Virginia and NC State would not play in Week 0 after the game was scratched from being played in Brazil. And we'll actually talk about this with Matt Grill. But news did come out this week that it is locked in. That game will be played in Charlottesville. It's a non-conference game, so keep that in mind when you're looking at some of those conference win totals over at DraftKings or futures. It is a non-conference game between NC State and Virginia, so that is worth noting there. But that game will be played Week 0. Look, the Week 0 slate, we've talked about it a bunch here on the podcast, but it's pretty solid. It starts with that UNC TCU game over in Ireland. We get to see USC, not to say that they have a great opponent in San Jose State, but USC, all kidding aside from my jabs at them and Lincoln Riley wildly underachieving pretty much since he stepped foot on campus, this team should be a lot of fun to watch, and they're big favorites. So we get to see a top 15 team in action. We get to see the Fargo Dome in action in their first FBS game as North Dakota State takes on Jacksonville State. We also, of course, get to see our beloved Hawaii Rainbow Warriors in the return trip to Stanford. And then a late night game. How about a late night game? Memphis and UNLV. So really decent. I'm not going to say great. I'm not going to go overboard, but I think it's a decent Week 0 slate with games at noon and a game all the way late night with Memphis and UNLV. So I am excited for Week 0. I think we all will be for Week 0 because it will be college football in front of us. We'll be able to bet on it. We'll discuss those games certainly at length. How about one little other note that I'll just pass across? I wouldn't say it's sad. I think it was his decision. He's a great broadcaster, but for all of us late night bettors, Dave Fleming has decided, according to reports, to not re-up with ESPN. So we will not hear Dave Fleming and Brock Osweiler and Stormy on the sidelines. That team will be no more because Dave Fleming he's been doing it for a long time. I don't begrudge the guy. He's the voice of the San Francisco Giants. He's an amazing broadcaster, but a little sad for us to not have him on that Cal-UCLA game Week 1. I had him locked in as being the voice of that game late night on ESPN, but Dave Fleming, great broadcaster, was certainly the soundtrack for us late night bettors, and he will not be broadcasting ESPN games anymore this year, but certainly an awesome broadcaster. And I get to watch Giants games, even though why would I watch Giants games, because they're terrible, but mainly because of him and John Miller, to be honest, the reasons that I watch Giant games. All right, just a reminder, folks, it's that time of year, college football right around the corner, meaning Preview Magazine is right around the corner, and we here at the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast, thrilled to be partnered up with our buddy Brett Ciancia and Pick Six Previews once again. Brett has built the number one most accurate college football preview magazine in America, and number one according to a number of ranking services over the last handful of seasons. The 2026 edition will have in-depth previews of all 68 Power 4 teams, and you can pre-order it now. Head on over to pick6previews.com, pick6previews.com, and during the regular season, when we'll have Brett back on the podcast, Pick 6 Plus will be back for 2026, the weekly in-season stat package that refreshes all season long every Tuesday, and Brett expected to be back on the podcast this fall as well. Sign up by July 15th and you'll get early access to his best win totals article, which last year went 6-1 against the spread. So check it out. Get your early copy locked in now, pick6previews.com. All right, little housekeeping before we hit a break. Just a reminder, you can always email the pod, cfbpod@vsin.com. We did have an email come in, a couple of guest recommendations. I have responded to those, and one of the guests that was recommended, we should have him on in July. So keep those rolling in. And as always, we're up on YouTube, so please subscribe over to YouTube. Every episode up on YouTube, youtube.com/college football betting podcast, and iTunes, Spotify. Those 5-star reviews are massive for us. Let's continue to build it up all throughout the summer months as we get into the regular season, when we'll be back with 3 episodes each and every week. Loaded podcast today. 2 great guests on the show. We'll go behind the counter with DraftKings Matt Grill first, and then best bets from Colby Dant of the Sports Gambling Podcast. Quick break. Matt Grill up next right here on the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. And as promised, a guest that joined us a year ago, he joins me and Matt Humans every week on VSiN Primetime, and we bring him here to the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast. He is the trading manager over at DraftKings, the man who puts together all of the college football lines that you love to bet. It is Matt Grill. Mr. Grill, happy early college football season, sir. How are you?
Hey, Tim. Yeah, great to be back. Can't believe it's been a year since I was on, and doing well. Kind of wrapped up all of my summer travel for the most part. So diving back into the numbers of course, is, we speak every week on air, and, we talk about this a lot, but, we're always over at DK. We're pumping out new content pretty much every week over the summer. Take pride in that. So usually we're first up with a bunch of these numbers, whether it be games of the year, RSWs, and a lot of other material. So just to always glad to keep the wheels churning over the summer with college football.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And certainly we in the betting space, from just either a content or a betting standpoint, very grateful to have as much opportunities that you guys put up there as possible. I want to put it to bed, but we had news earlier this week regarding Brennan Sorsby. He is not going to be in the supplemental draft. I'm just curious. I haven't had you on the podcast since the news came out that he was going to play and then wasn't going to play. So for you, as someone who puts these lines up, did you see action come in on Texas Tech when the news came out? How much of an adjustment do you guys have from Brendan Sorsby moving down to Will Hammond?
Yeah, great question. I think when I saw it, I was out of town when the news broke that he was going to play again. And, me and my guys, we're all pretty disappointed. Like, this is just something that should not be in the game. The rule from the NCAA was very clear that you cannot play if you do this. And then to get this injunction from a Texas judge was really to all of us just disappointing, because you don't want this to become precedent. And also, it makes our jobs hard because, we've gone back and forth now, I think 3 times, basically adjusting Texas Tech with Sorsby in, with Sorby out. Because every time this happens, of course, we've got to go in there and adjust the price of the Natty, the Big 12, the regular season wins. We have all got RSW matchups now. They're games of the year. So it's just a headache for us. And, we're going back for so many times. But you're right. Our long national nightmare with Brennan tourism is now over. So we can put that to rest. At least maybe he has some avenue to come back to school somewhere. I don't know how. I really hope not. I think it's good that he's going to sit out hopefully a year before going back to the NFL draft. But yeah, we're back up with Texas Tech and the Natty 22-1, back up with their undefeated and regular season win prices. And Will Hammond, he might not be back or really fully healthy for the first couple games here as well. They're going to play Houston, I think, in either game 3 or 4. We had that game up as a game of the year. Texas Tech laying 12.5. That was adjusted up to 14.5 after it looked like Sorby was back. And after that news, we've actually just frozen her now, taking up the board. Just got as tired of the back and forth till want to let it sit a little bit longer, let it simmer, and we'll have that back up soon. But yeah, definitely makes our jobs hard. And just when you think there can't be a crazier offseason story, you get this.
I want to take a step back, Matt. And, since, we talk, as I mentioned, every Tuesday night during the college football season, actually almost every Tuesday night during the whole year on VSiN Primetime. If you want to check that out, 9 p.m. Eastern time, Matt joins me and Matt Humans every Tuesday. But for those who have not heard it, a situation like Indiana in this sport to happen a year ago, I know 2 years ago it was the run to the playoff. There were some big numbers. I think you guys had around 100-1. Thinking back at a team like Indiana, does it make you and your team look ahead and say, all right, is there a possibility that we could see this happen again? Or do you look at it more as a blip in the radar moving forward that a team with such long odds like Indiana preseason would win the national title in college football?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that happened, so quickly after the expansion of NIL. I think looking back now that, obviously hindsight's 2020, you could kind of see that this is now possible with the transfer portal and just the fact that these schools are able to bring in, mercenaries, basically, whether it be a coach or these players, Signetti bringing in all the good players from GMU, but still, no one ever thought that this could happen. But when these colleges get funded now, like a Texas Tech, where they're just have all this money behind them from the boosters and can do this, it is possible now. In addition to having an expanded playoff, so now that you have 12 teams in, just get in the dance, and you're going to have a shot now. We've seen the teams that didn't have the bye before this year were the ones that were getting picked off in these first couple of rounds once they had to play. So it's just there's a lot of variables here that really no one had dealt with before that were new and were hard to assess because we didn't have any past history. So, still, I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing that we saw, Tim, with Indiana being 150-1 to win it all. Especially, they had just made the playoff, too. So, we should have probably been more conscientious of that. So that's why you're probably seeing some of these numbers this year on teams that could maybe make that leap that you're not going to get as juicy of a price now, especially one that probably just made the playoffs. So yeah, I think it was a once in a lifetime occurrence, but we could see more and more of this randomness now in the game.
How challenging is it, Matt, to make these numbers in this day and age? Have you gotten a better feel of it now with the portal and, some of the continuity? I would say college basketball, in my opinion, is a little bit more challenging because you can completely flip a roster in a year. Usually, maybe not completely flip it. You need maybe some holdovers. But for you, trying to properly set the futures market, knowing a team like LSU, for example, goes so big in the portal. You mentioned Texas Tech and how heavy they've been in the portal in recent years. So how do you try to put a proper number on a futures on the futures market?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, because I've been making numbers on games for 20 plus years now. And it used to be, right around this time or maybe in May, you'd probably start looking what a team did last year, what your ending your PR was, go look at the returning starters, maybe look at some coaching changes, some scheme changes, and boom, adjust your number and you were done and you could start rolling with that. But it's so much more involved now, especially due to the fact that, books like us and many others are coming out with content earlier and earlier and earlier. We're putting stuff up in January, February now, where honestly, you do the best you can, and a lot of it is just a guess. That's the truth of the matter is, we got to get this up. We figure, we're pretty sharp with what we do. especially with all the experience we have and the process that we have. But a lot of it has to be, you put it up, you do take some sharp bets, and you move aggressively. It didn't quite used to be like that. So it's a very different process now, although I will say this year was earlier than the past year because we didn't have a second transfer portal. So I'm very thankful for that. I did cut down on the work a little bit, so it was a little bit easier this year. But this is just how it's going to be now going forward. It's the Wild West, even in the springtime before spring games, and after that. So because we're putting out more than ever, like we talk about every week. We've got great new content on site, pretty much new stuff every week in the off season. So again, we're just putting this out, hoping we have a good process. Let's take some bets, and we'll move the numbers accordingly.
Well, we'll get to Game of the Year, Week 0, Week 1 line moves here in just a little bit. But I want to stick with the national championship market. Right now, you guys have Ohio State as your favorite at 6-1, Notre Dame plus 650, Texas plus 750, Indiana 8-1, Oregon 8-1, Georgia plus 850. Let's stop at those 6 because it does feel like as we talk preseason, Matt, most people in some order have those teams probably in their top 6 of a power rating. If you want to throw Miami in there as well, what action have you seen at DraftKings in your futures market so far amongst the top tier of college football this year?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. We opened Notre Dame 10-1 back in January, I think a couple days before the national championship, and we took money on them immediately. Really no surprise there with them being snubbed from not making it into the CFP and what they had coming back. So no, they're all the way down to 650 now, and we've got some liability on them for sure. We actually, I think if I'm thinking back, we opened up, I believe it was 4 co-favorites. We had Ohio State, Texas, Indiana, and I believe Georgia at the time, all 7-1 when we opened. So Georgia, I actually just moved them today from 10 down to plus 850. Just with the continuity and the roster there, I think they're still the best team and the team to beat in the SEC. Although hasn't been the case the last couple years of them going that far in the CFP. And we've got Texas plus 750. Got more liability on them. I might end up moving that out a little bit, just not sold on them. They could have very easily been a couple of losses worse last year. Those a couple really miraculous wins against Kentucky, and I believe it was Mississippi State. So, but yeah, those top 6 teams, I think, have kind of separated themselves. Like you mentioned, Miami, they're 11-1 right behind them. And after that, it's a lot of guesswork because, like you mentioned, LSU 18-1. What's that team going to be? Texas A&M 20-1. They probably were perceived to be a little bit better last year than they actually were. Got beat at home, and after that, Texas Tech 22-1. So again, we're just going to see what happens with them with Will Hammond, and of course the stalwart Alabama. When's the last time they were 25-1? That's where they're sitting this year. They've been on a kind of a gradual decline the last couple of years. So, really kind of great to see that we've got a lot of those top favorites, but not even like in years past when it was just a 14 playoff where you might see the favorite sitting at like plus 350 or 4-1. So kind of nice to see that openness in the race now.
Anyone else, Matt, as you look at, people who have taken, we like to joke, whether it be pizza bet or couch cushion money, have you seen any teams further down that maybe comes across your desk? You're like, really? Someone taking a shot at Utah to win the national championship at 100-1. Anyone further down the board that make you, I don't know, raise an eyebrow or just laugh a little bit that someone's taking a shot on them?
We've got a lot of these SEC schools that are kind of the mid-pack teams that are in the kind of like 50 to 150 range. There's a bunch of them. I'll mention Oklahoma too. They're 35-1.
Sure.
But you look at these teams like Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, Missouri, 60, 70, 89-1. South Carolina, 120-1. Maybe they bounce back after a really poor year or so. If one of them can make the leap and you can guess correctly, maybe they can get in contention there, get in the tournament and make a run. So I think those could be a little bit of value on those. The one's going to be really interesting is just because the conference is so I don't want to say bad maybe, but Clemson's not the dominant favorite anymore. That's they're kind of being supplanted as Miami, but Virginia Tech. Maybe you want to take a flyer on them. If James Franklin, who I think is a great coach, I think this is a great fit. If they can, again, you just got to get into the tournament and then all bets are off. Anything can happen. So maybe someone like them as a flyer. So again, if someone can spot the next Indiana this year, credit to them.
It's funny, Matt, when you think back to just a couple years ago, there were some people at VSiN. I think Mike Palm was one of them who had, Cincinnati to make the playoff at like 12 or 14-1, but there never really were massive long shots to, honestly, from a content standpoint that we could talk about, hey, you should take a shot on this team, because in the reality, it was usually pretty big name teams that made the field of four. Now you look at what we've seen in the past couple of years, whether it be Indiana 2 years ago or a James Madison a year ago, coming out of the Sun Belt, surprisingly. So, or SMU 2 years ago. Have you seen people, I know you don't have the make the playoff market up yet, but have you felt more people are taking some shots on kind of I don't want to say random, but unique teams that you as an odds maker maybe need to keep an eye on a little bit more with the market and, things being opened up a little bit more with the 12-team playoff?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'll correct you there, Tim. We do have to make the CFP up. It's just on the to make. Don't have the no's up yet. We'll eventually have some yes, no's and some of the favorites. But we do have those up, parlayable. So those have been like just phenomenal acts in the last couple years with the 12-team playoff, just with so many teams that can make it now. But yeah, we see stabs on those all the time, is on the G6 teams. If you can, like let's say like the American, if you can, like last
Sure.
year, where it was looking like a North Texas was maybe going to get in there, or some of these other teams have done well there. So we see stabs on those quite a bit, like a UTSA this year, 10-1, Army 10-1, South Florida 11-1. So UNLV, who's been so close the last couple of years from winning the Mountain West and having a chance to get in, they were 12-1. So yeah, we definitely see stabs on these quite a bit, just because you're seeing 10, 15, 30-1s on these as well. So, because again, one of these is going to be guaranteed to get in. So if you can guess right in the summer, you're going to usually get paid pretty well.
One final big future look. Let's look at the Heisman. And I've said it, I feel like a million times, Matt, over the summer. I have been calling it the year of the quarterback. The quarterbacks in this year's college football are going to be phenomenal, at least on paper. Whether, people listening know, but, you start with Arch Manning, Dante Moore, Julian Sayin, Trinidad Chambliss, Josh Hoover. The list goes on and on. So, look, you'll probably hear me make a case for a couple of guys further down the list, whether it be a Devin Dampier at Utah. I mean, heck, I'm looking at it right now. You've got Kevin Jennings, a multi-year starter, at 74-1 to win the Heisman Trophy. You've got Avery Johnson, a multi-year starter, at 80-1. And I'm not saying those guys are going to win it, but, it does. I hate the word value, but it does feel like, as you look up and down this board, you could really convince yourself on some big-name quarterbacks at some big prices right now.
Yeah, I mean, look at Fernando Mendoza last year. I don't have the number we started him at last year right in front of me. I know it was at least 40 or 50-1. So if you were just gung-ho in Indiana being a force again, and with him coming over, being a good quarterback and trusting in Cignetti, we took a hit on him, winning the Heisman, just because there was enough people that kind of caught on to that over the summer early on and during the season. So it was tough to get people off betting him and him coming through. And of course, if they lose that game to Ohio State, it probably would have been Diego Pavia, another one who started the year probably 80 or 100-1, much to my chagrin, because I had a future on him in my pocket. Didn't come to be, but yeah, they lose that game and he probably wins it, crazy as it might be. But yeah, this year you look at the top of the board and it's just complete thoroughbreds there with C.J. Carr, Arch Manning, Dante Moore, Julian Sayin, Chambliss, Hoover coming over now to Indiana.
You're not going to make that mistake again.
No. So it's going to be a fun race. It's something that I personally enjoy just about as much as anything. I'm sitting there usually all day Saturday, personally trading the futures on the Heisman and the national championship as the games are going on. So I take pride in having good numbers there and, kind of me against the world doing that. So definitely have my eye close to the vest on these on Saturdays. Maybe you get one through, but times is pretty slight. You're going to have a chance to do that against me. But yeah, it's always a fun race every year, all year long.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, and I do appreciate you guys having those live odds. I don't necessarily bet them, but it is something I love to keep an eye on as games go on. So as you're sitting there on a Saturday, take us through what you do to adjust the odds. Let's say week one, CJ Carr puts up 4 or 5 touchdowns against Wisconsin on a Sunday night, knowing a lot of eyeballs will be on CJ Carr. Or at the same time, let's say a Trinidad Chambliss lights up Louisville on that Sunday. How much do you feel like you need to adjust that early on in the season?
Yeah, really for the favorites, what you do are some of the top QBs who you're going to have a pretty big game or they're playing a really poor opponent. You just kind of think to yourself, all right, this guy goes off for 375 yards and 4 touchdowns. What's the number he would end up at? What should this number be shaved down to if this happens? So you have that in mind. Then if it's more of a kind of a close matchup, because obviously, as we know, these odds are affected by win-loss. There's really hasn't been a winning Heisman player on a kind of mediocre team in quite some time. So you're gonna have to take that into factor. So as you're kind of live trading these, you're looking at the live money lines for the games, and you have to factor that in to that as well as that at that end point, or for guys really poor game and injured, the opposite end of the spectrum. So you just kind of have this range in mind, and you can adjust as you go along. But you're right, when there's 20, 30 games going on, it can be tough to keep track of. Or if you just kind of get a guys maybe like a 200-1 guy who absolutely goes off. Let's say Byron Brown on South Florida has a 6 TD game and he's 200-1. He's probably going to be 60-1 by the end of that. So that's just something you got to be paying attention to as well. So I'll usually be sitting there with like a kind of a stats leaderboard, live stat board that'll show me kind of who's going off, and I can adjust accordingly. Also, it's not always just me. I've got the team helping out too, or we're calling it out during the course of the day in the room. So a lot of eyes on it, usually a lot of people speaking up.
Well, sometimes you can maybe get caught up in the moment, because I remember last year betting Ty Simpson to win the Heisman at 17-1, I believe, during, I want to say, I can't remember if there was their win over, maybe it was their win over Oklahoma, or it was some game early on in the season that I maybe got a little too overzealous on Ty Simpson there. By the way, need to correct you of a slip. Byron Brown now at Auburn, not at South Florida anymore, Matt.
Well, I'm saying last year when he would have been 200-1 at South Florida. Okay. But I will say, though, some of the 3 craziest days I've ever personally had doing this, I'd say a couple years back, Bryce Young playing in the Iron Bowl, making that, I believe, like 98-yard touchdown drive at the end and come back and I think getting overtime or beat Auburn late. That was such a wild swing with his odds and everyone else that was behind him at the time. So much fun. Also, a couple years back, the Pac-12 championship here in Vegas. I was sitting right here watching the game, trading the Natty and trading the Heisman with Bo Nix and with the Washington QB.
Michael Penix.
Thank you. And, because, again, they were both involved in the national championship odds, the Heisman odds, both involved with their teams in the national championship. So that was a very hectic, but one of the most fun evenings I've ever had doing this. Just the swings with every play was just wild. So you're sitting here just trying to move things as fast as you can.
I had a Bo Nix, I think it was 30-1 ticket going into that game. And I watched, I want to say the first quarter, and I had to make a call to get down on Bryce Young, because it was certainly trending the wrong way. But I'm glad you mentioned Jaden Daniels, because I think back to opening weekend, LSU loses to Florida State. I think it was the primetime Saturday or Sunday game. And with that loss, I don't know what you guys shifted to, but there were some sports books that moved out to 40, 45-1 because, and you pointed it out, Matt, we don't typically see quarterbacks or players from mediocre teams win the Heisman Trophy. And, that was a unique scenario where they lose that game and then he goes on this ridiculous tear and, they don't make the playoff, but his numbers were so gaudy. Once again, kind of going back to what you do on a weekly and nightly basis for this, how do you try to avoid overreacting? Because honestly, what I'm trying to do is trying to bet on those overreactions in the market.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably better off not betting it right at that time unless you're getting the best of the number, because afterward, we're going to overcorrect. We're going to protect our book. We're going to protect our risk. Then we might nudge it out a little bit later that night or the next day when we're kind of looking at it with a cooler head and not in the heat of the moment. So, you really just got to be fast and get those in. So you've seen how much this stuff can change the week to week. I think it was 2 years ago. It was after like week 10 when, where it was kind of some mediocre games, mediocre performances. And JJ McCarthy was a -110 favorite in the Heisman after like week 10. And he didn't even end up sniffing the award. And I just remember seeing the odds that week saying, this is just sad. And, it was kind of like, he was like kind of the default. And, probably not many people remember that point in time when that was the case, but it was the case. So just goes to show how much can change those last 2-3 weeks in the Heisman race.
Oh, there's no doubt. I remember a couple of years ago, I bet low or bought low on CJ Stroud, and he went for like 5 or 6 touchdowns against Michigan State. I was watching the live board. You were probably making those adjustments. He was like -200. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. Like, what a bet that I have. And then the bet against Michigan, and he ends up losing that award. So, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it was a long time ago. I remember, and I don't know what book you were at, if you were booking the Heisman, Leonard Fournette heading into a game against Alabama was, I think, like -200 to win the Heisman. He didn't even get invited to New York. To your point, things can change so rapidly in the Heisman market.
Yeah. I mean, the second that Indiana converted that third down last year in the Big Ten title game against Ohio State, and they were going to win, Mendoza instantly went from about -150 up to -1,500 down the one play. That's all it takes.
It's wild to just hear it from your side of things, and how quickly things can shift on one particular play, and how much you guys are just watching it. So let's dive into a little bit of power ratings, looking at this year and how much they've tinkered, and how much your true power rating compares to the futures market, because a team that, I'm donning their hat right now, Notre Dame, I know their schedule's very manageable this year. They are the biggest favorite to make the playoff amongst anyone, I think, around -700 or something like that. But when you look at the futures market, Matt, and compare it to your power ratings, how much is off from your power ratings versus what you have up in the futures market?
Yeah, great questions. When we put these up, of course, we're trying to get as close to like a true price, with the added, margin in there as we can, just to start off. I think that's always the best starting point. We're going to have, our opinions on a couple teams, of course. So you're going to see that throughout some of the futures and some of the games of the year. You could just look at a book and know, like, they like these certain maybe 5-10 teams. And, you just mentioned in Notre Dame, that's one for sure. I've got them right now. Tied for second in my preseason power ratings, about 1.5 behind Ohio State. Tied with Indiana, about 1.5 ahead of Oregon. And then, of course, they're getting the dream schedule this year. They've got the dream roster. So, this is probably their best team in quite some time. And in terms of like a preseason basis, all the dominoes are lined up, Tim. So I hope you're going to some playoff games this postseason. I'd be very surprised if they don't. Like you mentioned it, yeah, they're the shortest favorite to make the playoff at -800. We made a stand on some of their opening game of the year lines. They got bet as we segue into those a little bit. Which, we kind of knew that, but we wanted to, have a couple bets at our opinion on a team, and, that's okay. So totally good with doing that every time. That's worked out well for us the past couple seasons with the current process we have, whether it be games of the year or regular season wins, where we've definitely had an opinion from other books, or being out first, where, we're really not afraid to take some cracks at this before we move them.
So your power ratings right now, to circle back to it, you do have Ohio State 1, Notre Dame and Indiana tied for second, and Indiana and Oregon at 4.
Yeah, the Georgia 5th, Texas Tech, Texas 6th, Texas Tech will hammer to 7th, and then Miami 8th.
Okay. So let's get into game of the year lines. You guys put up 70, and I appreciate it. A little behind the curtain, Matt shot me a text to let me know that the game of the year lines were up. I've been razzing them a little bit. Hey, when are you gonna get these lines up? When are we gonna be able to talk about this? So you put them up. I was on vacation. Thankfully, I was in an area while I was on the cruise ship to have enough service. So I quickly looked them up, tweeted a couple out. But before we get into the specifics of those particular games, why 70? Did you just go through the schedule and say, "Ooh, I like this game. Let me put out a number. What ultimately kind of led to the number of games you put out, and why those matchups?
Yeah, absolutely. So would love to explain some more kind of behind the curtain stuff here. So when I did them, I literally just go through the schedule week by week, pick out the best games, pick out the best matchup, pick up the rivalries, pick out the cool out-of-conference games, try to pick out the best kind of G6 games that we're going to have. And I think I started with 140 was my initial list. So I will go through and I make a number on all 140. Then I start chiseling it down. Yeah, it was me and my other one of my other main guys on the team. He was doing the same thing at the same time. I was back from vacation. I was sitting right here. I was sick as a dog back from my trip to Europe. But I want to get these out for you, Tim. So I was working hard through being sick, but would have been doing it anyway. We're always out with these about the last week of May, first week of June. So we had a deadline to be anyway. I had to get them out between vacations. So he was doing them at the same time. He picked out his own list of games. And then basically I start chiseling down. He starts chiseling down. I get down to about like 110 or so. And I say, all right, let's compare games, see where we overlap. Then he might have a couple that I didn't have. I got a couple he doesn't have. And I say, all right, why do you want like this game? You know, why do you not have this game? He made fun of me for having Tennessee, Georgia Tech there in week 2 as one of the games. So that got the boot. Then you start taking the games away because you can't put up 100. I guess you could have put up 150, but I don't want people scrolling through the app or the website for too long. I want the real big games to pop. You know, these do take action, but, you know, sometimes it's a swing and a miss. We'll have a game up that doesn't take much money. You know, so I really didn't put up any G6 this year other than the Navy Army. You know, like to go with the rivalries, like to go with the teams that have storylines, it's the bigger matchups. And, you know, just it's the one thing that's a shame, Tim, I'm sure you can commiserate, is we're just losing the really big early season out of conference big matchups now. It's really a shame. So that's why I've got a game like Arkansas, Utah up. Probably wouldn't normally have that, but to me and you, guys like me and you, that's still a fun out of conference matchup you're not going to see all the time. So get up at as many of those as you can. But and with the way that the sport is going and where it's going, we're just going to see less and less in these with teams not scheduling these as a protection to get in the playoff, unfortunately. But that's how it works out. You know, we end up lining all these. We end up chiseling down a couple more. And in the last couple of years, I think we've done like 65, 80, and 70 this year. So that's the number we ended up with.
Yeah, you mentioned it. I went and just, you know, when you guys put up the week 1 numbers, I was curious of the projected top 10 teams, the only team that had a semi-competent opponent, at least based off of the odds, was Ole Miss, who's around a touchdown favorite against Louisville and Nashville. Everyone else, I believe, was a 3-touchdown favorite or more. And look, some of those matchups just didn't play out. Look, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, we thought it would be great. And it is not going, well, based off of the odds, we'll see how it all plays out. But, you know, you mentioned Texas was a team that maybe you're not as high on than others. So right now at DraftKings, Ohio State at Texas is a pick'em. You know, what have you seen action-wise so far in that game of the year? It's going to be a night game down in Austin. You know, Texas didn't like that it was a noon game a year ago. It was a lower-scoring game, you know, back in week 1 a season ago, Matt. But you personally aren't that high on Texas. Was there any divide between you and your team on putting out this number at pick'em between Ohio State and Texas?
Not too much. I don't think we're all as high on Texas as maybe some others. You know, of course, this was ended up being a pretty entertaining, low-scoring game. Last year, 14-7, Ohio State got it where that close pick. I think Texas actually was a favorite for a little bit before coming back late. It's late money in them. So might see the same thing this year, right around pick'em. You know, glad these teams are playing. Again, it probably ended up being a better game this year with some more experience under the belt for Julian Sayin and Arch Manning. So, you know, those were pretty much their first starts last year in such a huge matchup. You could really see the nerves from both those guys in that game. Of course, both got better as the year went along. So, yeah, another real good one there in week 2. That's the best out-conference matchup, you know, this season. So hope we get a great game. The money we've taken so far has been pretty decent on it, just handle-wise. Is pretty split on the action on that one. But it'll be really interesting to see if we have like kind of another move in that game come game day, because I think most people have Ohio State as their best team in the country that do power ratings.
So I want to get to, I'm going to kind of ping pong around in a bunch of games, but last week I had, mutual friend. I'm sure you're aware of Brad Powers' action, and I'm sure he bets, at DraftKings. He gave out a best bet on the pod of a game of the year line. He gave out Penn State plus 1.5 against USC. That's now moved to a pick. So I don't know if that was him. I don't know if that was the college football betting podcast Army hitting it, whatever it was. But that game on October 10th, we know the struggles that USC has had under Lincoln Riley, traveling the time zones. That's a really tricky spot for USC. So what led to the movement on USC Penn State?
Yeah, there's only real, the hardcores are the ones betting these games, in the middle of June. So, people that have, influence in the space are going to put that out, and we're going to see the bets. And, that's one where we're getting pretty one-sided. So, just to try to make us that small move over to pick from 1.5, and not give that extra point out there. So, yeah, that's one where it wouldn't be too surprised to see Penn State closing as a favorite come game day. We talked about just on Tuesdays about USC's struggles traveling east in the Big Ten. It's been a disaster for them so far, and not just covering, but just straight up winning these games where they're a touchdown plus favorite. Of course, Penn State is going to be Iowa State light here potentially with Matt Campbell coming over, bringing a lot of the Cyclones with them. So, they're always going to get a decent recruiting class there. And that's deep enough in the season where they're probably going to have it figured out quite a bit. So potentially even undefeated going into that game. I think this USC team this year is finally going to figure it out more so than they have the last couple. You've been seeing the improvement, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You're bringing in Mayava, who's got experience. You're right. It's probably going to be the whiteout at night, but I think USC is definitely still going to have the talent edge by the time the game kicks off in that matchup.
So I want to get to another game, a rematch of the Big Ten championship. It's going to be in Bloomington. It's going to be an enormous opportunity. I'm sure it's going to be big noon kickoff, which is kind of a bummer for, I'm sure, Indiana fans who would love that to be a primetime game. But regardless, I am curious because you mentioned your power ratings. You've got Ohio State 1, Notre Dame, Indiana tied for second. You got Indy and Texas 6. You've got Texas, Ohio State at a pick'em, and Ohio State, Indiana at a pick'em. Why is that the same line if your power rating is different?
Yeah, great point. That's one where it wasn't the consensus line. They're not the same as me. So the rest of my team, they got a little bit of a different of an opinion. So with kind of our consensus numbers all averaged out, that's what it came out to. So that's why you see a difference in that from what my number is versus what my team's number is. So we're trusting the process with 5-6 smart guys doing this, and that's the number we put out.
All right, let's get to some of the movement we've seen in Game of the Year line so far. What you would deem sharp, or what you went back and you're like, I don't know, maybe I should adjust this one way or the other. So let's start with some notable sharp action that you've seen. What games have you moved in your Game of the Year market?
Yeah, I'll start with what I mentioned just a little bit earlier, where we were, I think, higher than Notre Dame from a power rating standpoint, maybe than some other spots or some other people's opinions in the space. So we were willing to put out some numbers that we knew we were going to take action on one way. For instance, we opened Notre Dame as a 7.5-point favorite at home against Miami, knowing that just be one way. So we're willing to take those bets of that number. We're down to, I believe it's 7 now on that game. Yep, we're at 7 right now.
Matt, let me. Can I jump in real quick? You mentioned something, and I've always asked about it. I'm curious. I think our listeners would want to hear. You opening at 7.5, and I know there was another prominent shop that opened up, I think 5.5. There's a possibility for a middle there, but you mentioned kind of taking a stance. Why would you want to take a stance on that? Because you're confident that your number is right and that you want to write some Miami tickets there?
Again, we're trying to be agnostic to our numbers as much as we can when we start off. So we put all this work and we do all this. We come up with a number. That's what we want to put out, and just still maybe see what happens. And with our market influence, we're always pretty confident we can kind of drag around the rest of the market to our number a lot of time. That's how confident we are with what we do. So I know that's not going to be so much the case maybe in the middle of June with this, but we like to stick to the same process as we would do, let's say, in week 10, where we put out these numbers, agnostic to really the outside influences. And then, we can move it once we start taking some bets. So even though we kind of knew that'd be the case, we just want to stick to our usual process with something like that.
All right, so getting back to it, so you mentioned Notre Dame, Miami. That was opened at 7.5, down to 7 right now. Obviously, a massive game. I think top 5 game of the regular season, at least on paper. It's going to be an amazing atmosphere, especially if both those teams enter it and undefeated. What other games did you see? Did you see other Notre Dame games move?
Yeah, I think we moved all of them. We opened 24.5 at UNC. That's the 23.5. We've opened Notre Dame at 11.5 at BYU. That's down to 10.5. That's going to be another interesting situation by the time we get to kickoff. Just kind of when is that game going to be, just in terms of the development of both teams over the course of the year, what time of the day is it? It's going to be. That's going to be Notre Dame basically has a 3-game season. Let's not kid ourselves. It's going to be against Miami, at BYU, and home against SMU. That's pretty much it. So, these might be tough spots for Notre Dame in a way, but those are the games they're really going to have to key on. And they're going to want to make a statement in these games. And, like we talked about, I think we both agree this is their best team in quite some time, where they're just going to be able to shut these teams down if they want to and just bury them. So I get the whole situational edge. I've made many bets in my time on that angle, but with the way they score, look at what they did against Arkansas last year. Everyone was on Arkansas. That line moved close 4. They beat them by 50. So just sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. And the better team, the superior team, is going to come out on top. So not saying that's the case. I'm an underdog guy. I like taking the home dogs, but we'll see. But yeah, in terms of other moves, a couple games involving Michigan. We took some money on Michigan State against them and their rivalry. We put up what we thought was probably going to be maybe some one-sided money on Michigan against Oregon. They're catching 13.5 at Oregon, and then we've got them catching 14 at Ohio State. So that's where the power ratings don't quite match up with where we got Oregon in relation to Ohio State. But it's just where it's that kind of keyish number 14. We didn't want to go over 14. And it kind of seeing there was a couple other books out there that had the game up. So we're the highest at 14 there, so you can get the best number on Michigan. But it's one where you kind of think about Michigan going into Oregon that game, and the number just looks big at first, and the more you think about it, this is where we got the game line. Michigan's got a lot of questions coming into this year with Whittingham. Questions with Bryce Underwood. Oregon, again, this is maybe the most solid team in quite some time. They are pretty good at putting teams away at home. So I know those weren't the line moves. They got a little off the rails there, Tim. But some other moves here. If I'm just kind of scanning, we were just at Texas, a 7-point favorite at Tennessee. That night on to 6.5. Also Tennessee at Ole Miss was 9.5. That's down to 8.5. So always going to be a little bit of move in the SEC because it was always the most amount of the game of the years that we put up in that conference. There's so many of these great matchups that you can't help but salivate and put a ton of these up. So people are going to kind of glob onto certain teams in the SEC. Like we just mentioned earlier, where there's always going to be one or two of these that kind of rise up with the talent and the coaching and do well. So we're just getting going with these games of the year. We've got 2 more months, and people are going to be keying in on these. Just can't wait for more action on them.
So I want to talk about 2 teams that you mentioned. You mentioned Michigan, and curious what you guys expect from the Wolverines with Kyle Whittingham coming over from Utah. And then, the biggest coaching move of the offseason was, of course, LSU pulling Lane Kiffin in from Ole Miss. So LSU, Ole Miss, that game of the year line, by the way, and that one, that is going to be, I think, the most highly anticipated regular season game in quite some time. Ole Miss is a 1.5-point favorite. So Michigan, LSU, and have you seen much action on that LSU Ole Miss game line?
Yeah, this stuff writes itself, Tim. It's almost unbelievable. You got the Lane train pulling back into Oxford. The 3rd week of the season, it's just going to be the most hated man in town. It's going to be so loud with the booze. It's going to be unbelievable. So absolutely can't wait for that game. You mentioned that right now we're a 1.5-point favorite on Ole Miss, and action on that game, we've had a little bit more on Ole Miss actually, just because I think people are going to be wanting to bet on LSU, but right now, it's a lot of unknowns coming into the season. with them. So they're bringing in the quarterback from Arizona State. He's had some injuries. With Sam Leavitt in the offseason here. Here he's good to go now, but it was kind of like last season where the quarterback at Florida, he was there and just he had the foot injuries all in the offseason last year. Came back, didn't have the great year. Now he's over at, kind of back home in Texas at Baylor. So, those foot injuries are to me, just as a bookmaker, are scary because they can always linger so poorly. So when someone's coming over as your number one QB with a foot injury, I'm always going to take a little bit of pause. I know Lane is the QB whisperer. But again, we're dealing with a whole new roster here. He's bringing over old Ole Miss coaches. So many things going on in the game, so many dynamics. Just going to be great to see and a great handicap that the week of with where this line ends up.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one. All right, let's get to game. Let's get to lines for week 0, week 1 as we wrap things up here. Let's start week 0. I actually think it's a pretty good week 0, to be honest. There's some competitive games. We did have a venue change, so I'm curious what happened with the number there. NC State, Virginia, instead of being played in Brazil, will be played in Charlottesville. So what adjustment did we see there? A year ago on this very podcast, I said Hawaii shouldn't be an underdog to Stanford. They go out, they win that game, albeit a little bit lucky, and now Hawaii is at Stanford. You've seen that number move. So looking at the week 0 lines, we also saw UNLV Memphis move. What have you seen from an action standpoint for week 0?
Yeah, the last one you just mentioned, Tim, UNLV Memphis. We opened at 3. Memphis, of course, bringing in a new coach this year. UNLV has really kind of proven their mettle as one of the top G6 programs here the last couple of years. So, I think we did open that one a bit low. That's pretty much a consensus 3.5. Now that's where we're sitting as well. And then, UNLV is going to have a tough week 1 game on deck because they're going to the island, laying 1.5. So that's going to be a great game as well. So they've got two tests to start the year here. And, losing Anthony Calandria to Nebraska, who's a great quarterback for them last year, we'll kind of see. So, Dan Mullen is a great coach. He's kind of another QB whisperer. Love what he does. Hope we can hang on to him for a long time. That's a stellar week 1 game. And that Virginia NC State game, I'd like to sit here in politics though. Why can we stop having these overseas games with teams that just don't make sense to play there? I understand Notre Dame playing in Ireland, but why are Virginia and NC State playing in the UK? So very happy to see that game coming back to Charlottesville, for especially a conference game.
Well, they were going to play in Brazil.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
UNC
Tim.
and TCU's playing in Dublin. I'm sure
right.
Bill Belichick's thrilled about going to Dublin in week 0.
Yeah. Thank you for the correction. Yes, I told you I get a really big detail wrong on the show, but good thing we're coming back from Brazil. Correction there. So I have no clue why they were going down there. So I think smarter heads, cooler has prevailed in that one, getting it back on campus. So that one's moved from a 3-point line. We opened it back up at 4.5, now ticked up to 5.5 on the Wahoos there. Good opening game in the ACC. Then you mentioned as well, Hawaii Stanford, going back a year ago. A good game, an ugly game. Glad you were able to come out on the right side of that one. But in terms of week 0 games, when we're so starved for games for so many months in the offseason, that's a good looking game. And then we've got the rematch of Belichick playing TCU, like you mentioned. So, that one's sitting currently at 6.5. What's UNC going to look like in year 2 is a disaster year 1 for the Tar Heels. TCU, I guess I've always got like a soft spot for them. I always loved Gary Patterson going back years ago, just like their program. So, they're always kind of like a wild card, it seems like, every year in the Big 12. So, like you mentioned, in terms of teams in week 0, I'll be watching. I'll be definitely looking at the Horned Frogs.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what their quarterback situation is, TCU. I think they're right now planning to start a Harvard transfer and Jaden Craig, so we'll see how that plays out. Week 1, more of a expansive plate. Look, I'll be honest, you said it already, like, I love college football. It's my favorite sport. You and I love it. Week 1, man, we could do so much better. These games are just not a lot to be desired amongst the big boys, but maybe we'll get a big upset. Who knows? I mean, honestly, the best game on paper, in my opinion, is either UNLV at Hawaii or UCLA and Cal in week 1. So not the greatest slate, but regardless, from a line move standpoint, what are some of the line moves that you have seen for week 1 so far, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've moved about half the board from our openers, Tim, just on the spread. So just kind of go run through a couple here. Georgia Tech up to a 7.5-point favorite from 7 over the Buffs. So again, another storyline with Colorado the last couple of years. Haven't heard really much chatter about them this offseason. So I think people are off the bandwagon with the interest. You probably saw the images from the spring game. It was like the Dion era. It never even happened. So, but he's still there. Still like what he does. So be interested to see how they're looking this year as well. Just in terms of some of the other games, we've moved Louisville, Ole Miss. We opened 7, Ole Miss favorite. That's down to 6.5. That I think, Tim, is the best week.
Can you move that game back to 7?
That's probably the best week 1 game. Although that is a Sunday game. So got 3 Sunday games this year. So liking that. Unfortunately, right now, 2 of them kicking off at the same time. So just like you mentioned, why are we not doing another game later that day? Then the Labor Day weekend game, we got SMU traveling to Florida State for a pretty pivotal ACC game. Florida State again. Mike Norvell, what's going to happen with him this year? Is this his last year? They owe him so much money. He just kind of lost the team last year. It's been all downhill since they got snubbed, or arguably snubbed from the CFP. So what's going to be the deal with Florida State? SMU, a good program the last couple of years. They're laying 2.5. Probably see that one closing field goal or more of that game as well. Miami's traveling out. It's always tough to travel cross country, and weird things happen on the farm sometimes. Stanford upset Florida State last year. Beat Virginia Tech a year or 2 ago. Miami's going out there, probably not going to lose, but that one's gone from 21.5 up to 22.5. So with Miami such huge expectations this year, now the favorite in the ACC have kind of supplanted Clemson with that title. Clemson is Dabo ever going to adapt with what he's doing? So they're over 100-1 to win the Natty, and it's something you thought you'd probably never see with him still as a coach. So I think we're all going to have such an appetite for college football come week 1. We're going to get more excited about these games. So on paper right now, they're not great. Speaking of Clemson, they're going to Death Valley to play LSU. So just with so many unknowns with LSU, that's still going to, I think, be a competitive game, at least for a while. They've had a pretty good rivalry, played a bunch in the last 10, 15 years. So a lot of these games are going to look a lot more appealing when we get to week of.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And we'll be talking about them. Matt, I appreciate you kind of showing us how the sausage made. And we did this last year. Hopefully we can make this a yearly tradition of breaking it down early on. And, one of the markets I just saw, I don't know when you guys put this up, I thought it was pretty interesting from a game of the year, or a win total standpoint. You've got matchups up right now. Alabama versus Clemson, Arkansas versus Auburn, Indiana versus Miami. So some interesting ones. Notre Dame versus USC, fun one there. As you'll
notice they all have there's a storyline behind all of these. So whether it be a rivalry or something in the news, or Notre Dame USC, because hey, they're not playing this year, so let's put them in a RSW matchup. So just obviously we've got just a lot here that are fun
Penn
to look
State,
through.
Virginia Tech, LSU,
the James Franklin matchups. We did we got the Dylan Raiola matchup. We got Nebraska versus Oregon with a spread. So we like to get the little wink on those, a little tongue in cheek, and have fun with it. And hope everyone enjoys when we put out stuff like that.
Well, keep posted to DraftKings Sportsbook. I know you'll be putting up a lot of different creative markets out there. And you know what? I'll give out my email address, cfbpod@vsin.com. I'll relay the message to Matt if you want a creative market available this offseason. We'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do to create a unique market. But, Matt, this was awesome, man. Always appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Yep. Thanks, Tim, so much for having me on. Really enjoyed it. And, we're ticking down almost 60 days and below to the season. Can't get here soon enough.
And as promised, welcome in my DMV brother, the one and only Colby Dant, part of the sports gambling podcast nation over there, the College Experience. We're going to run through some win totals that Colby likes. And Colby, first and foremost, man, good to catch up with you again. Love doing this with you each and every summer. How has the off season, the prep work been going for you so far?
Well, good to be back. Good to see you as always, brother. Appreciate you letting me jump on these airwaves. And you know, the off season to me every year, it in a way it gets kind of worse just because you're hearing like court cases nonstop. Sorsby this, Sorsby that. So I can't wait. I look at that week 0 schedule, that week 1 schedule, like once a day, refreshing it. But other than that, I mean, look. It's an interesting time. You got Sac State in the MAC. All right. So, I mean, I often say like my grandfather played a role in me loving college football as a little kid, and he passed away like 20 years ago. And if he woke up today and was to see what we have done with his sport, it's a good thing he's not around to see it. But I still love college football just like you. So I can't wait for the season.
Yeah, Sac State in the MAC and Northern Illinois in the Mountain West. Other than that, everything else makes total sense as we go into the college football year. But we love season win totals. And, you know, look, I tip my cap to you and your pod. You guys pump out content every night. It's awesome. I love consuming it. Follow Colby, by the way, on Twitter if you're not already doing so, at the Colby D. And we just had Matt Grill on talking about, you know, how the sausage is made, how these lines are put up. And he and his team not that high on Texas. And that comes, you know, all things relative. He said in his power ratings, he has Texas at 6. But you sent me over some of the win totals that you like. And Texas under is one of them. Right now, Texas under 9.5 available at FanDuel -135, MGM -135 as well. What about Texas and this schedule makes you look a little bit towards the under?
Yeah, I mean, I just think like I almost feel sorry for Arch Manning to a certain extent because the pressure that he's under, just everyone's. I was listening to someone else's pod like on the way. I'm at the beach right now on vacation, and just you know, having him as the top quarterback in the country, and I'm like, I get it. Like he's a Manning. We probably should put him very high. But I also think if you look back at his best games from a season ago, you know, Sam Houston State, 133rd pass defense. Mississippi State, 78th best pass defense. Vanderbilt, 108th, 18th best pass defense. Arkansas, 104th. Even Michigan in the bowl game, 54th. And, you know, so his best games, he didn't have really a great performance against a top 50 defense. And even Michigan being 54th, maybe you say they're better than those numbers, but like, the more you learn about the situation at Michigan, I think everyone was checked out by the time that bowl game hit. The DC wasn't talking to the head coach for like the previous 8 weeks. So I don't know. Yes, he got better as the season went along, but I still want to see it against elite competition. And this year's schedule, because I thought the SEC had gifted Texas pretty good schedules the first 2 years. This is a real schedule. Obviously, they're going to the 9-game conference schedule. Another thing is, I'm not a big Steve Sarkisian guy. He's 2-8 against top 10 teams, and to me, he still has to prove it to me. He's been at some pretty good schools and hasn't really delivered yet in the way that he should. I question his play calling, especially in the red zone. But getting Cam Coleman obviously is going to help, and the O-line I think will be better this year. But I just think when you look at the schedule, there's too many tricky spots. And we'll start just at week 2. Week 2. I mean, just getting Ohio State that early in the season. I don't know about you, but I feel like I have Ohio State power ranked higher than Texas. So I get it. It's on the road there in Austin, Texas, but I think I will take Ohio State to beat them if they play today. So I have Ohio State taking them down. And then there's just tricky spots at Tennessee. I don't really know what to expect with Tennessee. They tried to get Aguilar back for his 10th season, like every other SEC school does this year. But the Red River Shootout, you get Oklahoma on a revenge spot. I'm kind of high on Oklahoma this year. I think Florida's going to be much better this year. So you get Florida, even if they get the Red River Shootout, They come home to a Florida team that I'm kind of high on. And then, Ole Miss, I don't know what to really expect of them with Golding, but on paper, they look like they're going to be solid again. But you still have at LSU, at Texas A&M, at Missouri. There's enough meat on the bone here for them. To me, like I think the under's the play. I actually like taking the miss the playoffs play as well. They have to just prove it to me. Prove it to me that Arch can play against elite defenses, and also Sark can win these big games.
Well, it does feel like a bit of a correlated play, and when you look at these season win totals, Colby, to see anything less than double digits for Ohio State feels like a misprint. But the schedule's brutal. But you mentioned where you are on your power rating. We just heard from Matt Grill. His personal power rating has Ohio State number 1 in the country, slightly ahead of Notre Dame and Indiana. The schedule's brutal, as you alluded to, at Texas, at Indiana, at USC, home to Oregon, rivalry game to wrap it up. But, man, the last time Ohio State didn't win, or let's just put it this way, the last time Ohio State lost 3 games in a regular season, that was that just disastrous Luke Fickell interim year. And even prior to that, you have to go back to like 2004. So, this is on paper the best team in college football. I'm not saying they're winning the title, but Colby, I'm kind of with you here. 9.5, you got to lay some juice. And at DraftKings, they'll let you parlay them. So if you have a team that you really like, you want to pair them up. But, minus 164 at FanDuel, minus 166 at DraftKings. I know the schedule's hard. I just have a hard time envisioning Ohio State losing 3 games in the regular season.
Yeah. And I know we've never, Arthur Smith's the new OC. I don't really worry about, because there is the narrative like the NFL guys struggle in college. Well, not at Ohio State. You saw Matt Patricia last year, right? And it just, you have to be a really bad coach to fail at Ohio State, especially when you see, this set of receivers, and I think Sagan's going to take a step forward this year. I thought at moments, he looked really good last year. He needs to stretch the field a little bit more. I think he will. The receiving core, I think, is the best in the nation. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith and Ennis and what do they got? Chris Henry Jr. this year. Mm-hmm. And then Bo Jackson. But that's the one thing I'm curious to see is whether Arthur Smith, he kind of had the MO in the NFL of being run first. I don't know that you need to do that at Ohio State with this set of receivers, but I think their O-line will take a step forward regardless, just because of his presence. So the schedule, I couldn't believe it. It is a ridiculous schedule, though. Like road games at Texas, at Iowa, at Indiana, at USC. That and then home games against Michigan and Oregon. I don't know that they've ever had a schedule this hard in my entire life. I don't know that, but I just trust that they're going to get it done. Like, as much as I love Iowa and I love Kinnick, it's a dangerous place to play. I think the Buckeyes should be able to handle their own there. At Indiana, maybe they lose that one. They get the bye week before USC. I kind of like their chances. Lincoln Riley's got to prove it to me. There's a lot of hype coming out of LA again.
Shocking.
Yeah, and I know they don't have. I know they don't have your Irish on the schedule, but I'm still a skeptic with the Trojans. So I think they can do enough. Getting Oregon at home, I think, is a big game. But even if they drop that, you got 2 losses there. So you're allowed 2 losses with that 9.5 win total. So I think the over's going to hit. I think they're the best. I honestly think on paper they're the best team in the nation.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree. I mean, I think, as we just discussed, you could throw a lot of these teams kind of in a bag, whether it be Indiana, Oregon, Notre Dame. If you want to throw Texas, if you want to put Georgia in there, obviously Ohio State, kind of all in that same realm. But if push came to shove, to your point, what we heard from Matt Grill, I would probably put Ohio State just a notch ahead of all of those teams. You mentioned you like Iowa, so let's jump to Kirk Ferentz's team. Yes, still there. Year 28 for him at Iowa. It's unbelievable. Win total sitting at 7.5. And look, with these win totals, please look around. You could save yourself a lot of juice. Don't just go to your first sports book. I looked up 3 different books. DraftKings is minus 115 to the over. MGM's minus 145. So save yourself 30 cents on the vig there with over 7.5. But you like the over here for Iowa. What jumps out to you about Iowa? Because, the quarterback concerns certainly are a question, but let's be honest. When was the last time we felt comfortable about a quarterback situation in Iowa?
Yeah, and I'll tell you this: had Gronowski not gotten injured in that Indiana game, I thought they were the better team that day. If you go back and watch that tape, I kind of feel like Iowa was the better team that day.
I had Iowa, and I know a lot of people were flipping out about the safety late in that game. I'm like, no. Iowa was the right side. Don't stop it right now. They were the right side.
100%. And they bring in Hank Brown, who was at Auburn. He was once a pretty decent, recruit. So now I get your point. It's not a quarterback safe haven over there but I did think they took steps under Tim Lester, who's now I think in his third year. I do think they are a much better offense. They've taken steps to be a better offense since Brian Ferentz left. But really, like, Kirk Ferentz is just a lock. The defense. I don't care about returning production, really. I just know their guys stay around most. They don't use the portal a ton, especially defensively. And those guys have just been in the program. Their special teams is always going to be top notch. Although I know they're breaking in a new special teams coach, so we should consider that. But then the schedule, they do have one of the best home environments. I think it's one of the hardest places to win. They were 4 plays away, really, when you think about it, to being undefeated last year. Like, they were not that far away. I know we're saying that Iowa was the right side against Indiana. Oregon was the right side against Iowa, but Iowa was still there in a spot if Dante Moore doesn't make that unbelievable throw to potentially win that game. And the fact that Matt Campbell's no longer at Iowa State is such a great runway for the Hawkeyes this season. They get Northern Illinois, who Tommy Hammock left, pretty abruptly in the offseason. Yeah. They seem to be a bit of a disaster as they transition to the Mountain West. Iowa State, then Northern Iowa. So they're going to be, to me, undefeated going into that Michigan game. This gauntlet right here of the 3 games at Michigan, home to Ohio State, at Washington. Yeah, you're going to have to navigate that. And if you lose all 3, I still think you're safe, because after that, it opens up to me at Minnesota after a bye week. Kirk Ferentz has owned PJ Fleck. If you look at the numbers there, and I think the one game Fleck got was controversial based on that punt return fair catch there by Cooper DeJean.
I had Minnesota in that game. I was I agreed with the call. Refs, you were perfect. Great call.
Yeah. I mean, it depends what side you're on that one. But Ferentz's record is unbelievable against PJ Fleck. So as much as I'm high on Minnesota this year, I almost have to see them beat Iowa to believe that can happen. Then Wisconsin, I'm checked out on. Northwestern, I'm pretty checked out on. Purdue, I still wonder why Barry Odom took that gig. At Illinois, that's a tricky game. Bielema's an Iowa, grad, so that one's a little tricky. But altogether, I just trust that Ferentz will get one of the games that I think if you were to throw this in a vacuum and say, okay, there'll be dogs at Michigan, dogs to Ohio State, dogs to Washington, dogs to Illinois. I think he'll get some of those. Now, sure, they could. Northwestern for some whatever reason plays them tough, but I just think I trust Kirk Ferentz to get 8 wins pretty much every year.
Yeah, you mentioned Minnesota, and our last memory of Minnesota, an overtime win against New Mexico. I know you and I were big New Mexico backers last year. That was a hell of a game. The Rate Bowl down in Phoenix. I remember I was watching that game at a bar in Tucson the day before. Being on the sidelines, Colby, for the infamous Snoop Dogg Bowl. And it was a hell of a game. And Minnesota was able to get that win. To bring back Darius Taylor is such a big win, for PJ Fleck. They have their quarterback coming back in Drake Lindsey. So you're looking at a win total. If you want to lay a little juice, over 5.5 at DraftKings is -150 right now. If you want to get a little more bullish, over 6.5 is plus money at both MGM and FanDuel. So curious your thoughts on the Golden Gophers as they head into this year. Last year, undefeated at home. They were a great home team, 7-0 straight up at home a year ago. So what do you make of PJ Fleck's squad this year?
I think on paper, this might be the best team he's had there in Minneapolis. Drake Lindsey, and I don't believe, I have not, completely kept up with the he had a DUI a couple weeks ago, in his home state of Arkansas, I believe, which I didn't know. I didn't know they gave out DUIs there, but Drake Lindsey, that's something to monitor because I would assume he's going to be suspended. Maybe the Mississippi State game. I don't know what a DUI suspension does these days, but getting Darius Taylor back, I'm really excited for that. Maverick Baranowski, their linebacker, is a stud. I think on paper, if Lindsey can take that step forward, because he played pretty well for a freshman, and the fact that he's now got that experience to go with the run game and the receiving core of Javon Tracy and Jalen Smith, I do think this is his best team on paper. Now the schedule's still tricky, but I actually was toying around with the idea of playing them to make the playoffs. I'm trying to remember what the odds were for them to make the playoffs, but I certainly like the over. I think they should be 3-0 in the non-con against Eastern Illinois and Mississippi State and Akron. I guess monitor the suspension stuff with Mississippi State, but I'm not very high on Mississippi State. So even with the backup, they might be able to manage that. But then the conference play, at Washington, I don't know where you are with Washington, but the Damon Williams situation left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. So I don't know.
I'm in a tricky spot, Colby, with Washington because I am a Damon Williams truther. But him leaving and then saying, no, I totally want to be here. Yeah, does have my concerns and my radar up a little bit. I love the guy. I think he's a unique talent, but I have my questions right now with Washington, how that season's going to play out.
Well, I am in the same boat as you, where you can see his skill set and think he's great, but your quarterback, football's a different sport than, basketball or baseball, where like if your quarterback is doing that, is supposed to be your leader, even if you don't think he's a leader, the rest of the team looks at the quarterback, and that's a weird message to send your team. Because also, I think a bunch of the players were at like a funeral too when he sent this. I thought it was like an athlete with the program, so it was that had passed away, not their football program, but I believe like their athletic department. That one makes me very weary. So I do think Minnesota could win that game potentially. I'm kind of down on Washington, or I shouldn't say down. They're unknown to me.
Right.
Getting Michigan, Whittingham at Michigan, I'm fascinated to see. I'm hearing reports that Underwood might not even start, but I find that hard to believe with the amount of money they're paying him.
Or they got to start Braden Fowler Nicolosi? Come on.
Yeah,
what are we doing here?
Yeah, I had heard people say that like Underwood was struggling to really get Jason Beck's offense, but you're paying him that much money, he's got to start, right? I mean,
if Devin Dampier was there, it'd be a different case. But I mean, I sold my stock on Fowler Nicolosi about 3.5 years ago.
Oh, I'm with you on that. He doesn't fit Beck's offense too. Underwood does. Just from his mobility standpoint.
Maybe it's just a situation, Colby, where they're, hey, we put these rumors, maybe put a little fire under his butt because of, the NIL deal that he got. I don't know. I mean, it could be old school motivational tactics, if you will, from Whittingham.
Yeah, they have. I think they have another quarterback they have that they're kind of high on too. I think if memory serves me correct, I think his last name might be Carr.
That's right. Yeah, they've got CJ's little brother.
Yeah, and I couldn't remember if that was a connection to Lloyd or not.
Tommy Carr.
There we go.
Yeah. He's the grandson of Lloyd Carr. He's CJ's little brother.
I think that's the guy that I heard that they were high on.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah, I've heard. Yeah. I did read that he had a really good. Now he was a true freshman, but I think I did read that he had a really good spring.
Yeah, that maybe that's. I think that's the one. So Nicolosi might be deep on that depth chart, but yeah. I mean, I just think that's a winnable game, especially in Huntington Bank Stadium. There, Whittingham. I like the hire. Just I don't know about this season for Michigan with installing a new offense, new defense. Even though he brings some of his guys, and I just think you look at the rest of the schedule. There's a path there, man. If Penn State isn't what we think they can be with their joke of a schedule, it is. I think there's a path for potentially 9-3, and then I know a 9-3 team hasn't gotten to the 12-team field yet, but if you have the right wins, if you have a head-to-head win, maybe if you upset, an Indiana or a Penn State, and they're right around that, there might be a path. But I definitely like the win total over. I think this is his best team. So sign me up for the Gophers on the over. And I don't think it's that crazy to take a stab at the playoff odds.
Can we row in the boat? 35-1 at BetMGM for Minnesota to make the playoff. I think 25-1 at FanDuel is what I saw out there. All right, let's wrap up the Big Ten portion of your win totals. Let's go with the Badgers. I will see Wisconsin week 1 as they take on my Irish up at Lambeau. I know you are anti-neutral site games. I, for one, am pumped for it because I've never been to Lambeau Field, so I will be excited to be there. But for the most part, I do agree with your sentiment on social media. We're having too many of these stupid neutral site games. But I went to the game in 21 at Soldier Field. That was pretty neat. And now Lambeau Field this year. So Notre Dame, 20-point favorite, somewhere in that ballpark against Wisconsin. Look, you're a guy that knows the G5 in this gambling space. There's not a lot of folks that know the G5 like you do. I was a little surprised to see maybe you're down on Wisconsin because of the addition of Colton Joseph. But win total sitting at 6.5. You can get a little plus money to the under on the Badgers. Year 4, it's make or break for Luke Fickell. And you don't think this is going to be a breakout season for the Badgers?
Yeah, and enjoy Lambeau. Lambeau is awesome. Like, as much as I don't like neutral site games, like, it's still a great, unique experience. One of the better NFL stadiums, or just in general, just the whole Packers organization is kind of like, the fact that they exist in the NFL is like an anomaly of how this exists. Yeah. So you're going to enjoy that, I think, even though that's not a Packer game. But yeah, I mean, Colton Joseph, I think a lot of people remember his like 2 75-yard runs against Indiana to start the season.
Yep.
Which, fair enough. That I seeing how Indiana played out the rest of the year, I can understand being like, oh, who's that guy? He played good too, but I think a lot of that was Kevin Decker, their offensive coordinator at Old Dominion, who's now at Memphis, which I think is a great hire by Charles Huff. I just think this is another animal, man. I think the Sun Belt's also been down. I think it was down last year. I think it's down right now. To jump in to learn an offense, and really, I don't find the staff that Wisconsin seems a mess. They were trying the Derry raid. Now the Jeff Grimes thing. Never been a big Grimes guy. The athletic director just left. That might. I mean, I guess if you're Luke Fickell, that might be a blessing in disguise, because you might get the whole season as opposed to potentially getting fired mid-season. But the schedule is their best schedule they've had in 3 years. I just think that they didn't have a player drafted for the first time this past year. I just don't think they're that talented. They're going to lose to Notre Dame, as you well know, right? They're going to lose as a 21-point spread. Yeah. Well, Freeman early on, you got to worry a little bit.
That's true.
But I think you're looking really good with the Irish this year. Then Western Illinois, Eastern Michigan, they'll probably be fine there. But I got them losing at Penn State. I even think Michigan State, who I know their program's a disaster too right now with everything going on. You heard Tom Izzo ranting the other day. I even think that's like, Fitz is great as a dog, but Wisconsin will be favored in that game. I don't feel amazing about Wisconsin in that spot. Love the Bob Chesney hire at UCLA. I don't see them going out to the Rose Bowl and winning that game. Don't see them beating USC, although USC has had their issues when they travel to obviously losing at Maryland a couple years ago. And then at Iowa, there's too much meat on the bone here for me to believe that Luke Fickell, the Wisconsin I've been watching over the past couple of years, you just throw in a new quarterback, they're going to be fine. I only got them favored against like Purdue, Maryland, Western Illinois, in Eastern Michigan, maybe Michigan State, but I just don't think there's enough there for 7 wins.
All right, let's pivot to the Big 12. I love the Big 12. I love how unique this conference is. Look, you mentioned it to start this conversation. The Brendan Sorsby saga was honestly, for us and what we do in this space where we just talk about games, it was kind of banging our head against the wall. I do have Texas Tech to win the Big 12 at even money. I still think they, based off of their schedule, The drop-off at quarterback, I think, is not that massive from Sorby to Hammond. I know Hammond with the health issue, but let's jump into some other teams that you've looked at here. And you can mention, Wisconsin going to the G5 and grabbing some pieces like their quarterback. But what about Oklahoma State, right? They go and get Eric Morris from North Texas, Drew Mestamaker, Caleb Hawkins, two big boys following him, the quarterback and running back respectively. But it does feel like a little bit, Colby, that people assume that they're just going to be plug and play winning 8-9 games. Now, the win total sitting at 6.5. You actually can get 5.5 under at plus money. But if you want to lay a little juice, Oklahoma 6.5 under -160. What's your expectations year one for Oklahoma State here?
Yeah, and this is a trendy play. I feel like that a lot of people like Oklahoma State in the over with Mestamaker and that offense. I just have a little concern if Eric Morris is really a legit head coach or not. He's only had 3 winning seasons as a head coach, and he's had 7 years as a head coach. And he's been at some places that spent some money. In the FCS, Incarnate Word spends money. Last year, to me, it was kind of a perfect storm with North Texas. We took the over. I can't remember if I did it on this show or not, but
I think we were all we all enjoyed the run that North Texas had. That was one of the easy winners of the year for sure.
But a lot of it, I think, was schedule based. Like you looked at it and you're like, wow, they're getting all these the best opponents in Denton, and it wasn't. They avoided Memphis. They avoided Tulane until the championship game. That is, of course, where they lost. So to me, I don't even know. I think that team was not as good as the record reflects a year ago. And jumping to the Big 12, I have my concerns. Now, I get the pushback is like continuity. That does win these days. Like I do believe there's a reason why Army and Navy have had great success the past couple of years. In a sport where it's changing, the rosters are changing and flipped so fast. There is something to continuity. But I just think I don't know. I thought he should have been. He needed a few more years to me in the American to really prove that he's a legit head coach. So coming there to Oklahoma State with the big step up where you're going to be playing much better competition. I just think there's a lot. I look at the schedule and I honestly think they're going to have issues. Some people say the schedule is easy. I disagree. I think at Tulsa to open it up for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. Tulsa gives them fits. They beat them last year. Yeah. And I remember some of the best Oklahoma State teams under Gundy barely getting past Tulsa. Trey Lamb and Tulsa got a little bit of money. That's something. Like I think they had a $30 million donation for their football and basketball program. So I actually think that's a scary game week 1 to get them. Then Oregon week 2, that's a loss. Murray State okay, but after that, their road spots are brutal. At West Virginia, I don't see them beating Rich Rod. I love Rich Rod in year 2. I know we're going to talk about them in a bit. At Houston, Willie Fritz, I think they're legit contenders to win the conference. At Iowa State, now that's historically a house of horrors for Oklahoma State. I think everyone remembers that they were almost in the playoff back in the 4 team. And Iowa State seems to be, this is kind of a rebuilding year, but I like the Jimmy Rogers hire. And I think by the time you get to November, October 31st, this game is, I think they're going to be a much better team by that point. And then, you're at Kansas State and a back-to-back away at Arizona State. I don't really see them winning any of these away games. If it is, in conference, that is, if it is, it would be Iowa State, but I kind of like how they get them so late. And then your home games, I like Kansas this year. I think Kansas getting Andy Kotelnicki back is a good thing for the Jayhawks. I think they'll be a bowl team. Texas Tech, obviously, we don't need to really say they're buying everybody. I think Scott Frost and UCF are going to turn the corner this year and make a bowl. So I think that home schedule is harder than you think. Colorado, okay, I don't know what the heck to expect with Colorado. So that game seems like Oklahoma State should be all right there. But I just think that that schedule's too much, and I like the under. They got to prove it to me.
Yeah, I mean 6.5 is a big jump. It does feel like once again the juice there is -160 to the under at DraftKings. If you're a little more bullish, under 5.5 plus money at MGM and FanDuel. You mentioned West Virginia. Let's get to Rich Rod. Year number 2 in his return to Morgantown. And, the start of the season, you got Coastal Carolina, UT Martin, and then you play Virginia on a neutral. I know you love neutral site games. And then Oklahoma State, like you said. And that seems to be a big swing game, I think, for you. September 26th is going to be a big day for you with this win total swing here, because I'm looking at 5.5 juiced over -50 at DraftKings. I'm curious if you can talk me into the Michael Hawkins experience, because that makes me very nervous at the quarterback position. But they do bring in a stud running back in Cam Cook from the G5. Talk me up on Rich Rod, 5.5 over here for the Mountaineers.
Yeah, well, I when I saw him get Michael Hawkins, my eyes lit up, because I know that he struggled in the Red River Shootout when he played when Dylan Gabriel was knocked out. But they had been raving about him too prior to that. He's not an air raid quarterback though. Like trying to when I watched this game, I saw his speed, and he obviously struggled at his time starting at Oklahoma. But I just thought, man, if that guy, I think I even said this at the time, like he would be great in Rich Rod's offense, or someone like Rich Rod's offense. And for the shoe to fit now, I think he's going to be a problem. I think he's going to be like Pat White. I think like that. Ooh. To me. I think that one, right. And they still have Scotty Fox too, who played pretty serviceable down the stretch. But I actually think this is the reason why I'm all in on West Virginia. Rich Rod year 2 in general, but I think Hawkins puts that element of speed running the ball that if when Rich Rod has a dynamic quarterback like Rasheed Marshall back in the day, or Pat White, or at Khalil Tate at Arizona, mm-hmm. They're lethal. And you mix that with Cam Cook and a Big 12 that seems to be pretty wide open. They return a lot of starts on the offensive line. I love the schedule. I think there's a gigantic runway for West Virginia. I think, Coastal seems to be a mess. UT Martin, okay, I think they're going to be coming into that game in Bank of America Stadium, taking on Virginia. Virginia, great season a year ago. I love Coach Elliott. I've had him on my show, but a regression is due. They won like 7 games by like a field goal, right? Like, so losing Chandler Morris, I kind of think West Virginia will be in a spot to get them. I mean, call me crazy. There's a path for them to be like 7-0 going into at TCU. I have them as that going into the TCU game, because it's the far road trip in the Big 12. So when I see Arizona at Morgantown, I'm like, good luck, Brennan. Good luck. So I think this is the year. I mean, you've seen this where his last previous stops, year 2, really ever since he took over W the first time, with the exception to the Michigan thing. And I still believe if you gave him more time at Michigan, he was going to get it going. So I'm all in on the Mountaineers. I love Zach Alley, the DC. I thought he was fantastic. He came over from Oklahoma a couple years ago. I think they're going to take a big jump, but a lot of it does have to do with the schedule, but a lot also too, Michael Hawkins. I think he fits perfectly in Rich Rod's offense.
Well, I also say, and I'm curious your perspective on this, and I've heard this said, I'm not, splitting the atom with this, but when you're a team like West Virginia, you want your losses, if you will, to be on the road, right? So at Texas Tech, at Utah, at TCU, they don't play Kansas State, they don't play BYU. So to your point, a lot of their swing games end up at home, and you can make a strong argument. Look, these environments as well as anybody. Pound for pound, BYU, West Virginia, I'm trying to think of the best environments in that conference. I would say, Iowa State's usually pretty good, but I would probably, Colby, say BYU and West Virginia, best 2 environments.
Yeah, maybe you throw Utah in there too, but yeah.
Utah, yeah, that's my bad. Rice Eccles, yeah.
Yeah, those 3 would be the first that come to mind. And like, I'm not that high on TCU this year either. I mean, at TCU is always tricky. There'll be a bowl team, I think, but there's a great schedule for them to me. Like, even if they lose those 3 road games, I like the fact to get Iowa State in the first 5 games, with how much turnover they have going. It's a schedule that breaks really well for them. And the being that far weird road trip, with the exception of Cincinnati, everyone else, I mean, to get to Morgantown, it's a trip. You know what I mean? Like, you fly into Pittsburgh, right? Take a bus, so I think they have a legit advantage, great home environment. Rich Rod year 2 is a thing that hits, especially when he gets hits on his quarterback, and I think it will fit here with Michael Hawkins.
Well, let's talk quarterback with Kansas State because they have their former quarterback coming back. Colin Klein comes back to his alma mater where he was the OC for a while, left to go to Texas A&M, and now has returned. And, I feel like it's been a running joke on the pod over the summer. It's like, oh, yeah, that guy is still playing quarterback. And that's Avery Johnson. It was 2-3 years ago that we were talking about Avery Johnson as becoming the next maybe Colin Klein, right? Next big-time quarterback. They let Will Howard go. He goes and wins a national title because of Avery Johnson. So it felt like he was, 3 years ago or 2 years ago, Colby, he was like 25-1 to win the Heisman. And now he's still the quarterback. And he's like 80-1. I'm not saying he's going to win it, but this is a team, and I'm curious your numbers on Kansas State because I would say you can easily put them at number 4 based off of talent, whether it be Texas Tech, BYU, Utah in some order, and then Kansas State. So win total's pretty lofty, though, for year 1 for Colin Klein. It's 8.5 plus money to the over at DraftKings. But you expect Colin Klein to have some success year 1 at his alma mater.
Yeah, I do, and I know he's ignited the fans. I feel like that follow K-State, so I think that's a step in the right direction. But I thought Avery Johnson was done at K-State. I thought it seemed like to be a disaster, and I thought he's going to hit the portal, end up somewhere. But Avery Johnson, comes back mainly, I think, because Colin Klein was, I think, the guy who originally recruited him to Kansas State, and that's their highest recruit, I think, in their program history. So that is intriguing to me, being that they had a previous relationship. Joe Jackson back at the running back spot. I love their tight end Garrett Oakley. I think he's going to have a big season for them this year. And to me, the DC hire is the one that I'm intrigued by. Jordan Peterson is a Mike Elko guy. That one I think could really work out in their favor. So I'm buying some stock on K-State this year. I think not only does the schedule look nice, because that's half the battle these days. Is you're just looking when you have conferences this big, you're just looking for the good schedules, and could this teams make a jump? Do they have a veteran quarterback? I think they got everything else. I mean, I think the defense. The big concern to me would be the defensive line. A lot of inexperience on the defensive line, but once again, I love a Mike Elko defensive guy coming in. I know you're familiar with that as a Notre Dame fan. So,
he's great.
Yeah. So you go into the schedule. They start off with the great runway. Once again, I think Nichols, Washington State, and Tulane at home. Washington State and Tulane breaking in brand new head coaches. They take a trip to Cincinnati. I think Satterfield's a dead man walking. So I've got them 4-0 at that first bye, or at their only bye week, before they host the Houston Cougars and Willie Fritz. And I am high on Houston, so I think that's tricky. But man, you look at the other spots. There's no Texas Tech on the schedule. There's no BYU on the schedule. They've owned Kansas in the rivalry. That's one thing Leipold's done a great job getting Kansas to a respectable level, but they cannot beat Kansas State for whatever reasons. Then they at Arizona State is one that I fully kind of expect them to lose that game. But the other spots, getting Colorado, getting Oklahoma State, getting Arizona to come there on November 21st, and then Farmageddon, I think they have the leg up on them this year. So I think you should take a shot. I think, to me, for them to get to the Big 12 championship, and then anything can happen at that point. So I love Kansas State on the over this year, just mainly based on the schedule. Your toughest opponents, to me, you're getting at home. I think Houston's the best team on their schedule, and they're getting them at home after a bye week. And then you're getting Arizona November 21st. So I think everything breaks right. Obviously, I need that D line to be solid, but a Mike Elko guy I can trust. So let's go. Give me that over, and sprinkle that Big 12. I think they're a legit contender.
Well, I'll say this: if you want a backing of Mike Elko guys, how about the one person he brought with him to Notre Dame way back when? Clark Lee. That worked out pretty well. That was a Mike Elko guy. When Elko left to go to A&M, he got promoted to the DC at Notre Dame, and now obviously at Vanderbilt doing miracle work. Now they're getting money, so that helps. But let's wrap the Big 12 up with one more win total with Brent Brennan's Arizona Wildcats squad. Another quarterback. Wow, Noah Fafita. You're still playing college football. Who knew? Tommy Boy, lots of people go to college for 7 years. But Noah Fifita, still there down in Tucson. Their win total sits at 7.5. How about a week 2 showdown in Provo at BYU? Early season sneaky good game right there between BYU. They also have to go up to the Palouse week 4, which could be a weird spot for Arizona to take on Washington State on the road. So Arizona win total 7.5, -125 to the under, and that's the way you're looking here.
Yeah, and I was on Arizona over last year. I think Brennan's a really good head football coach, but what they have going road wise, I don't know what they did to Brett Yormark, but the road trips at BYU, non-con game at Washington State. Hey, those guys should totally be in a conference together. But then at West Virginia, at Texas Tech, at Kansas State. These are the hardest. Short of Utah, they get every tough environment. I think that we just power ranked.
Yeah.
In the conference, and then you still have home games against Utah, against TCU. I just think there's too much here. I know Fafita's, having an experienced quarterback is fantastic, but man, there's just too much going on here. I can't see that. I think 6-6 is probably what's going to happen for Arizona. As much as I like Danny Gonzalez and everyone there, so just too much there, in my opinion.
All right, we're going to do 2 more. Let's hit on one that I've already played, so obviously I want to hear your analysis on it because we're on the same side on this one. And then I'm going to ask you just a wild card, whether it be G5, just the win total that you absolutely love. But let's go to the one that I played a couple weeks ago. Thrilled that you're on the same side as me here. Air Force over 6.5. Falcons have had very uncharacteristically bad back-to-back seasons, missed bowl games for 2 straight years. Liam Zarka is back. Troy Calhoun is there for forever, 20 years now for Air Force. And then you look at the schedule, right? You avoid Hawaii. You get North Dakota State at home. You get UNLV at home. You're non-con. You're always going to have Navy and Army, but you get Navy at home this year, which will be a weird 10 a.m. local kick there for that rivalry game. Your road games, you do end up playing New Mexico at the end of the season, but hopefully by then we're already hay is in the barn with this win total. So Air Force over 6.5. Juice is pricey, -160 right now, but I laid that. What do you like about the Falcons this year?
Yeah, you're kind of seeing a renaissance with the service academies in this new NIL era. Minus Air Force, they haven't got it together yet. The past 2 years, Troy Calhoun will figure it out. I think he's one of the best coaches in the sport. One of the things I've already done my preview on our show, and I got a quote as saying he thinks this is the best offensive line he's ever had at Air Force. So that right there in the trenches, Air Force not known for throwing the ball, folks. So when you tell me you're the best offensive line, I think that is okay. I'm paying attention. And now you lose a lot of the best teams within the conference. So that right there alone, and then you look at what they're hosting. Yeah, they're hosting North Dakota State, which is a great addition by the Mountain West. That one I think will pay off for them. But you get them week 2. You get UNLV at home. They should have beat UNLV last season.
My gosh.
That game was ridiculous there at Allegiant Stadium. And then to me, the rest of the schedule is winnable games. You're hosting Navy this year. Short of the New Mexico game, I think there's a legit shot for they're going to win the entire Mountain West. Because remember, in this conference, you're hosting the home game. And if you win this, in the regular season, you're going to be hosting that. But the quarterback spot, they found their guy last season. The offensive line is there. They hired the new DC who's familiar. He was previously Air Force's DC like 10 years ago. I think that'll work out. And Steve Russ coming back home. Main question is the D line to me, but the secondary and linebacking core returns a bunch. And that's really what you're looking for with the service academies to me is like, how many reps are you getting? How many snaps have these guys played? So I'm all in on Troy Calhoun. I still think he's one of the best coaches in the sport. What he's done at Air Force, for the most part, with the exception of these past 2 years, has been pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and to get that UConn, that was that weird UConn game a year ago. They went to Stores or wherever the hell they play their games. Hartford, I think, is where the rent is, and they lost that game. Now you get UConn, who's completely changed over. Mora's now at Colorado State. I love that spot to get UConn back at Colorado Springs on Halloween. So I played it over. Glad to hear you're on that as well. Colby, let's wrap on this. Dealer's choice. Where do you want to go? The world is your oyster. Give us one more win total that you really like this year.
Yeah, I'll take you. I'm going to go to the. Now, I will say, last year one of the ones I looked really bad on your show was San Jose State. That's one that I was
there too, man. I was there too. Ken's my guy. I love Coach Ken. I don't know. I think they're gonna. They have 13 games this year, so beware when you're playing their win total. I really have a hard time envisioning their success this year. But I was right there with you. I thought the path was there. They had all the home games set up, and it was a disaster for Coach Ken.
Yeah. So, but I think this year for my pick for that, I like, and we were right on Southern Miss last year, but Marshall, I think the Thundering Herd, the Sun Belt seems to be quite the mess right now. Overall, as a conference, I love because there's actually regionality, much more of the blueprint of the college football we grew up loving. There just seems to be App State seems to be a mess, right? I mentioned Kevin Decker leaves Old Dominion and Colton Joseph leaves Old Dominion. There seem to be, in a tough spot. JMU's breaking in a brand new head coach, although we can kind of trust that they know what they're doing. But Coastal's down, like Georgia Southern seems to be down. Like you look throughout this conference, it seems to be kind of a mess right now. One thing I was really taken back by was Marshall last year. Tony Gibson won 5 games, and really, I think he had 4 one-score losses. That was shocking to me because we know Charles Huff took that entire team to Southern Miss.
Southern Miss, yep.
And I bet the under on Marshall, and I ate it because Tony Gibson, I thought, had this team way ahead of schedule, and he's a Rich Rod guy. Obviously, I've made my argument or my case for Rich Rod in West Virginia. I thought Gibson did a great job with Dave Dorn at NC State, and I think NC State misses him to this day. But Rod Smith, their OC, had a really respectable offense. He's another Rich Rod guy, was with them at Arizona. And I like that. Their defense was terrible. They bring in Brad Lambert, veteran defensive coordinator. He's been at Marshall before, Bill Snyder guy. I like that get, and they return a lot. I mean, how much of Rich Rod's offense, to me, if you tell me it's rhythm-based. So year 1 is always tricky. Year 2, year 3 is when you really want to, jump on that. Carlos Del Rio Wilson back at the quarterback spot. Then the schedule they play. How about this for a stat for you? They play, I believe it is 5 of their 6 first games are against first-year head coaches. So they're trying to figure it out there. So I love Marshall on the over. I honestly think they're a shoo-in to get to the Sun Belt Championship. The only problem is I had to remind myself there's still divisions.
Right.
And
James
so
Madison's in their division.
That's where I my only hesitation was, because I was like, if you're taking the top 2 teams, it's going to be JMU Marshall. But then you're like, they got to win at JMU. I don't know if that. So I just think you play the win total then. It's not that bad of a play because they get JMU early, and you want to get a first year coach early. But JMU's spending money that the rest of the conference cannot duplicate, in my opinion, right now. So that one seems to be a tall order. But I love Marshall in the over.
7.5 plus money, plus 125. If you want to lay the juice, minus 190 to the over. 6.5 at DraftKings. Colby, you're the man. Give us a lowdown. I know you guys do so much content over at the SGP. So where can people catch you? How often are you guys giving different types of previews out there?
Yeah, we preview 138 teams this year. I remember it was a lot easier doing this like 10 years ago. Right? Just keep sneaking these teams in there. 138 is the number we're at. So we're doing pretty much 45 minutes to an hour on every single team. And also the sports gambling podcast. We're covering everything, but my show's the college football experience. We're breaking it down pretty much every single, conference previews, schedule previews. We got you covered for all of it. We even do an FCS show as well. So, check us out, and I appreciate the time, Tim. Always a blast, brother. And next time, when it's unfortunate there's no Mountain West Media Days at Circa because I was looking forward to running into you. But I'll see you sign up weekend.
Moving it to the Palms, man. What a sad day. We'll still have to sneak some of those coaches over to our studio to come in studio. But Colby, you're always welcome to come into the VSiN studio. You know that. At the Colby D is where you could find him on Twitter. Colby, appreciate it, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you, brother, man. Take care.
Loaded podcast today. Thanks to Colby. Thanks to Matt Grill. Thanks to Wyatt, our producer. Thanks to Ryan Hunter as well. I'm Tim Murray, and this has been the VSiN College Football Betting Podcast.